I believe you have already caught your breath. Welcome. So we'll be talking about digital banking transformation in Africa. And the first question that I would like to ask to you is the status of adaptation of digital transformation in Africa. So what is the current status of digital, of adaptation of people in terms of digital transformation in Africa? Welcome, madam.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So just a bit of an introduction of paymentology before we start. I don't know if people are familiar with what we do. So we are a global card issuer processor. We work with digital banks, traditional banks, fintechs, telcos, globally across the world. Close to home, we power the M-Pesa Visa card in partnership with Vodacom and Bank ABC. So we're very familiar with digitization of the card payments work stream with banks and traditional banks. And what we're finding is fintechs and digital banks are digital by default. They go straight to digital processes, digital onboarding, digital apps, digital card applications, partnering with us to get things like virtual cards. So the mobile app and the mobile phone is the form factor that they've jumped straight to. They don't have bricks and mortar branches. They prefer not to even use ATMs. They don't have agents, many of them. Everything's done by the mobile phone. Then we have the players that have been in the banking business for many years, the traditional banks, the tier one banks, and slowly we're finding that they are also digitizing. So there are elements of their various work streams like onboarding, like fraud, like security, like payments, which are slowly becoming online and digital. It's a harder job for them because they're dealing with legacy systems, they're dealing with physical infrastructure, whereas players like digital banks and fintechs can jump straight to using cloud technology. So they have a much easier time of digitizing, whereas traditional banks, it's a bit harder to move and to make that innovation. For example, we're working with Time Bank. We process their cards in the Philippines. So Time Bank is one of the biggest digital banks in South Africa and one of the fastest growing digital banks in the Philippines. And they've got a completely branchless digital onboarding process that's worked very successfully for them. And digitalization for the banks is all about reaching the mass markets, reaching people that maybe live far away, they're not close to a bank branch, they can easily apply and open a bank account on their mobile phone using eKYC, for example, get a payment card in minutes and they're ready to go, they're ready to transact. So we're seeing pockets of excellence, we're seeing traditional banks change to digitization, but it's a bit of a slower process for them, whereas it's much easier for ones that are going straight to the mobile and straight to digital from day one.
Thank you very much for answering that question, but also thank you very much for giving us a short introduction. As we have Mr. Dr. Babatunde, would like to go to you, straight to you now in Nigeria. You are from the Fintech Association of Nigeria. So first of all, I would like for you to start with telling us the current situation in Nigeria. How is it with regard to digital transformation? But also, in that process, we would like to know how you guys are dealing with cybersecurity and fraud prevention, because that's among the challenges that are talked about everywhere in Africa, but especially in some countries in Africa. And I believe you know a lot about that, and you can give us advice that will help us all. So Dr. Babatunde, please, welcome.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. For us at the Fintech Association, what we basically do is to be able to connect everyone within the tech space to accelerate technological growth and to be able to advocate for the ecosystem. So in terms of Nigeria, I mean, we've seen a lot of growth coming from 20 years ago where we had to queue to get money in the bank in order to be able to sit in your room, either through the legacy banks or upcoming digital banks. I think we have currently close about 12 digital banks in Nigeria, which are the fintechs. And then we have the legacy banks who are already changing and upgrading their own systems. And even to compete more effectively, central bank allowed banks to have holding companies. So they're creating holding companies. The banks are becoming subsidiaries of the holding companies, and they are now starting fintech subsidiaries. So to be able to compete with the fintech. So it's quite an interesting space. Kuda is probably the biggest digital bank in Nigeria with about 6 million customers. You have the likes of PiggyVest with about 4.5 million customers. So they are growing rapidly, and I think that it's a good development. Coming to your question on cyber fraud, that's a big problem. So, I mean, the way I always address this is that it's in the days, I mean, I used to be in banking. In the days of banking, your fears was that armed robbers could attack your bullion van, or they could attack a branch, and take money, and they might probably get away with 10 million naira in your vault or something, or 100 million naira in the bullion van. But today, somebody can sit somewhere and take out billions of naira or dollars, as it were. So it's a huge problem, and it's a problem we have to live with, because as we develop new solutions, the crooks are also developing their own, improving on their own solutions. So what we're trying to do in Nigeria is the fact that there's a need to have collaboration and work together, the legacy banks, the fintechs, and regulators alike, such that if there is if a fraud is reported, that we can all put a hold on any accounts that have been flagged. That might eventually have to get a bill from the National Assembly to support that, because if you block somebody's account for more than a certain period, they can go to court and the court will support them. So we need a bill to be able to hold that, because I mean, we've had cases where money is moved and within seconds, the money is already been moved into 54 different financial institutions. So how do you track that? We need to be able to use a central system to be able to track that. Maybe that will reside with NIBS, which is the Nigerian Interbank Settlement Systems, such that we can have that centralization to be able to block things and reduce the impact of cyber. In most cyber cases, you also discover that there are probably insiders, that ex-staff, existing staff. So the issue of integrity in people that are being recruited is also critical. But it's a big problem. It's not just an African problem or a Nigerian problem. It's a global problem, and we all have to. There has to be serious collaboration between all stakeholders to ensure that we can minimize the impact of cybercrime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And add up to that, I think you have some knowledge about how the regulators. What do you think is the role of regulators in in this transition, as well as how we can balance between risk and how we can transition in this manner?
So
I'm a regulator. Oh, okay. So all right, it wasn't meant for me.
Yeah, sorry. We'll go back to you, sir. We'll start with Madam here.
Okay. So in our experience, and we work with a lot of clients in many regions globally with different regulations and different types of regulators, I would say. So there's some very forward-thinking regulators that do their best to help the digitization agenda. They put out regulation that allows things like eKYC, digital IDs, electronic signatures, which really foster the digitization of processes. Then there's regulators who are more risk averse, they may be not as forward thinking, and regulation hinders progress, it hinders innovations. So we, for example, in the case of Paymentology, we're a cloud native card processor, so our system sits in the cloud. We don't deploy physical infrastructure in a country. So the whole way our software as a service functionality works is you connect via secure connections to the cloud, and we provide the services of card processing to our clients. There's countries around the world that regulate the fact that there has to be on-soil infrastructure, on-soil data centers, and for good reason, they're protecting people's informations, but they're not up to speed, or they're not allowing the latest innovative technology, which is secure and is safe, and data is protected. We follow global, for example, PCI DSS certifications. You know, we have to be certified in order to process card data, to be certified by MasterCard and Visa. But there's regulators out there that insist that if you want to operate in a certain country and you want to process for certain clients, you have to have physical infrastructure in physical data centers. And it's just not cost effective for a company like us. So there's countries we won't operate in because of that regulation. So if there was a way for regulation to balance agility, fostering innovation, but still keeping people's data safe and secure, because the regulator's role is to manage risk, as you said, and to foster trust in the digital payments ecosystem. So they have a fine line to tread between allowing innovation but also managing risk. And we understand it's a tough job. Some regulators have got it right, some are still getting there, some unfortunately are very far behind. So that's where what we find with regulators. It can help or it can hinder.
Doctor, I think you had something to add on that. Please welcome.
Yeah, you were asking about regulators. I mean, what's the role of regulators? I mean, role of regulators is extremely important. I mean, they help to shape and define things. And I think that for us, we have to carry them in Nigeria. What we have done is we have what you call a regulator forum. The regulator forum is a forum that meets quarterly, and it brings all the regulators in the country together with innovators, that's why it's called regulator, so that we can discuss things. There has to be engagement between the players and the regulators. I mean, obviously, technology is ahead of regulation, but we can bridge that gap by engaging one another, and that's what we do here. And so that's bringing a lot of, making even the regulators become innovative and trying to also come up with policies, framework to support things that are happening within the ecosystem. So that's their role is extremely important. That would be my addition.
Thank you very much, sir. So I wouldn't like to take much of all of us of our time with asking my questions, because I know members of the floor have more questions for you guys. So I would like to open this room for discussion, and because of the time that we have here, we are going to have a few questions. They're going to be answered, and then if we have more time, then we can have an opportunity for more questions. When you ask your question, you can just go, please use 1 minute to ask your question. If you have a comment, please make sure it is in 1 minute as well. But we would like to encourage questions first. So if you have questions, you can direct it, or you can just say this is just a general question. Any one of them can answer, and they will answer it. But we would like for the questions to be direct. So if we can have the protocol people, please, moving the microphones. We have one question there. Do we have another question? We'll take 3 questions first. They'll be answered, and then we'll move on to the other questions. Can we have anybody else who has a question? We have one question there. Anyone else with the question? Before we know the impromptu questions. So we only have one question for now. We have 2 questions. Anybody else? We have 3 questions. So we'll start with these 3 questions, and then we'll move on. Welcome, sir.
Can you allow me to ask 2 questions, one for each speaker? I have a question for Dr. Babatunde specifically. Nigeria is the first country in Africa to adopt the central bank digital currency system. And it is one of the few countries in Africa that have taken steps in that direction. As a participant and player in the Nigerian market, what is your experience to date? Have you felt the impact of these CBDCs, and how does it affect the current financial system in Nigeria? Then to Madam Christine, I have a question on the costs of banking in Africa. We generally know that the costs of banking in Africa are quite high, and we believe that digitization is a step forward in bringing down those costs. I want you to share with us your experience in terms of how much have we been able to bring down those costs, because in my experience in Uganda, the costs are still very high and very prohibitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for being on point and very straightforward. We'll use his example when we go to the next questions. Can we get your name, sir? Your name?
Good morning. I am Engineer Matiku from Institute of Finance Management. My question is to Dr. Batunde. And it's how far Nigeria has been support through regulations and policies for the inclusion of startups, mobile wallets. Thank you.
Have you got the question, sir? The third question?
Yes, I did. Inclusion of regulation in terms of startups and mobile wallets. Is that it?
That was the question. Yes. The last one?
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel. I come from Uchumi Bank. My question goes to Madam. It's about the regulatory perspective. How is it flexible in terms of adopting the changes? Because currently we know the technology is changing very fast, and some of the regulatory perspective, they are not in line with the changes. So it's like we are on the game and we are still learning the rules while playing. So how is the flexibility of the regulation? Thank you.
All right. So we'll answer those questions and then we'll check our time. If we have more time before the other presentations, we will proceed with the reply. So we'll start with Madam Kristen here. There are two questions for you. First one, cost of banking is high in Africa. In your experience, how we can bring them down. And the second question on how flexible the regulations are. Welcome, Madam.
Okay, so the first question I think is something we, at least as a South African, I have experience of the cost of banking coming down. And digital banks play a key role in this. So traditional banks, if you think of how long they've been operating in countries like Uganda, like Tanzania, like Kenya, they've taken years, decades to build up their business and their footprint and their number of accounts to where they are today. Nowadays, digital banks, by digitizing processes like onboarding, for example, they can open accounts in a matter of minutes. So I'm going to use Time Bank as an example again because they're a very good example of a digital bank that's done this successfully. In South Africa, they opened just before COVID, 2018, 2019, they're now sitting on 8 million accounts. They opened their 8 millionth account about a month ago. They charge 0 fees for their bank account. They offer high interest on savings accounts. They offer payment cards. I'm sure there are fees for things like ATM withdrawals, but they've managed to keep their costs down by optimizing their bank processes. So they've reduced things like staff needed for manual processes by automating those processes and using technology to reduce the costs on the bank side to service their clients and then pass on the savings to account holders. So the more we see the emergence of digital banks, I think digital banks, by offering low cost, almost the wallet experience, the mobile money wallet type experience, but the benefit of being a bank account that bears interest and they can do lending and other banking products, but the same kind of experience that people are used to with mobile wallets, the more we get players like that entering the banking ecosystem, the more we'll see the costs coming down. And traditional banks will have no choice but to compete with those players because they're going to lose customers to these digital banks because they have innovative solutions, they're quick, they're easy to open, so, like the case of Time Bank, they're free, So clients are moving to these banks. In South Africa, Capitec is another big example. They started as a lender, actually a micro lender. They're now considered to be one of the top 5 banks in South Africa. And they went with a digital model, a digital onboarding model. So it is possible to bring the cost down. We've seen it happen in South Africa, and I think we will see more of it happening in East Africa, in countries like Uganda. I'm expecting it to happen.
The flexibility in adopting changes with regard to the regulations, what do you think?
So I think in the past, regulators maybe operated more in isolation and weren't familiar with global technology, global regulations, global standards. As regulators are more and more open to learning from each other and sharing the knowledge of things that have been successful in other markets like Nigeria and South Africa and Europe, UK, where we have the likes of open banking, for example, where banks allow their customer data to be used by other players. The more I think the regulations will change, regulators have to see that it is done in a responsible manner, that data is protected, that it's safe, it is secure, and players like Paymentology, who follow global security standards, global data security standards like GDPR, which is the global data protection regulation out of Europe. Because we have to do that because we're a global player, it gives regulators comfort that players like us are not introducing risk into the system. So I think it's getting more flexible, but it does take time, and it does take a lot of lobbying from stakeholders in the ecosystem, like the banks, like the fintechs, like players like ourselves, to make those changes.
All right, I believe both your questions have been answered, and we'll have Madam Kristen here around throughout the conference, and if there's more questions or follow-up questions, we'll ask them. Back to you, sir. We have 2 questions for you. I believe you have both of them, and if you don't have them,
Yes.
then I can remind them to you.
Yes, I do have them. The first one is on the central bank digital currency. That, for me, it's an excellent, innovative decision of the central bank. But, I mean, it's had its own teething problems. I'm yet to see a startup that got it right the first time. So, like I said, everybody's a startup in this emerging technology space. So there are a lot of initiatives going on. I think right now they have about 1 million+ subscribers on the CBDC. And initially, fintechs were not involved in the implementation, but now fintechs are now involved. So a lot of they have partnerships now with the likes of Flutterwave, with Remita, and a few of the big fintechs on deploying the CBDC. So there are a lot of blockchain fintechs that are also working with the central bank right now, looking at how there can be a convergence between the CBDC and other stable coins. So there's a lot of initiatives going on. I think that we should just wait and see. Unfortunately, there's a change in the central bank. We don't know what direction the new management will take in respect of that. But I think that it's a good initiative. They just need to fine-tune some of the issues that were involved in the implementation when it started. But I think it's a good thing. In terms of inclusion for startups and mobile wallets, practically all fintechs operate by wallets in Nigeria. What we don't have is the fact that airtime cannot be used for transactions. And I think that's where you have that's where there's a difference between what we have here and other clients. It has to be cash. When I say cash, it has to be, now you can't use your airtime for transactions. You can buy stuff with it. You can only do airtime. So, but most of the fintechs operate by wallets, and there are regulations to guide that. So, hope I answered your question.
I hope both the questions were answered correctly. Very well. All right. We'll provide your information, your contact information, some of your contact information to the people here. I believe you'll be glad to answer more of the questions as the conference proceeds.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we would have loved to have more questions with our first our panel, but Fortunately, because of time and because of the many other speakers that we have here, we won't have more time with regard to digital banking transformation in Africa panel. So I would love for all of us, please, to give a round of applause to Madam Kristen and Dr. Babatunde Obrema for taking us through all this. Can we have a round of applause to both of them, please? Can we have a round of applause to both of them? Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again in the conference. And if you stay here, please, we'll love to have more questions for you. Thank you.